5 important personality disorder types in spirituality. Hello, this is Chris speaking, Shores of Infinity, with a video about 5 important personality disorders in spirituality on the spiritual path to enlightenment. So first of all, why am I talking about personality disorders at all? Why am I talking about personality? For more than 3 years, I've been telling you on this channel that personality has nothing to do with enlightenment, and now I'm talking about personality disorders. Why? Well, if we look at it from a Hawkins scale perspective, until Hawkins scale 700, you still have a personality and it's still active. From 600, 700 onwards, it diminishes and then disappears towards 1000. But most probably, very few of you are beyond Hawkins scale 700, so you still have a personality and it still asserts an influence over your whole system and sometimes takes over. And one of the most interesting things about personalities is that they often don't do their job, or they do their job in a weird way. The job of the personality is to protect yourself in social circumstances. You only need a personality to deal with other people. If you're living alone in the woods or in the desert or in a cave in the Himalayas, you don't need a personality if you never interact or talk to anyone. But if you're living a relatively normal life in a town or village and talk to people, then you need a personality. And enlightened people still use their personality for interaction, but they know it's a persona, it's a mask, it's a personality, it's not them. They're not identified with their personality anymore, but they can still use it like a suit, like a dress, like an ornament, like a telephone. People who are not enlightened use their personality all the time, and usually the personality is much stronger than any other parts of your being and kind of dominates your thinking and your emotions. So, in psychology, since Freud and co, you found out that personality can get wonky already in childhood if strange things happen to you during your childhood, especially if your parents were already kind of strange. If your parents have personality disorders, it's very likely that you will develop some as well, or other psychological disturbances. But let's have a look at personality disorders. Usually, it's a problem of self-worth. If your parents didn't give you the feeling that you're worth anything by yourself, independent of them or others or what they expect of you, then it's possible for you to develop personality disorders. These are very hard to treat. Until the age of 18, usually personality disorders are not diagnosed because they're not settled yet. Above around 18 and the early 20s, they form and usually stay, and they're hard to treat. They can be treated, in my opinion, but they're very hard to treat. But two of the most succinct personality disorders, they usually don't go to treatment. They don't ask for treatment. Narcissists and antisocial personality disorder types, they usually don't go and ask for treatment. Officially, about 9 or 10% of the population of countries like the US or Canada or European countries are afflicted with personality disorders. That's the official number. The unofficial number that no one knows about is probably much higher because not everyone goes to get a treatment and thus a diagnosis that then gets further communicated to all kinds of agencies that then create any kind of statistics. Especially there's one personality disorder that is very, very common and is in some pieces of literature estimated to be very high. 20, 30 or more percent is codependent or dependent personality disorder. Which disorders count as a personality disorder, and what kind of personality disorders? There used to be groups like cluster B and so on. It differs. It changes every few years, so this, what I'm talking about today, will probably be officially outdated in a few years, but it doesn't matter. I'm just taking 5 personality disorders that I see as very common with people on the spiritual path. They're common anyway in the overall population, but they're also common on the spiritual path. Right now in the DSM-5, there are 10 personality disorders. Antisocial personality disorder, avoidant personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, dependent personality disorder, histrionic personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, obsessive compulsive personality disorder, which is not the same as OCD, paranoid personality disorder, schizoid personality disorder, and schizotypal personality disorder. The last 3 have nothing to do with schizophrenia. Yeah? Schizoid just means that you're split off from your emotions. So there are some personality disorders like histrionic and borderline and narcissist who have very, very strong emotions, over the top, and the drama queens. And then there are some like the schizoid and schizotypal which have very, very low emotions. At least they can't consciously feel them. What most of these personality disorders have in common is the need to feel needed, the sensitivity to criticism, weird relationships, insecurity, abandonment fears, and over-reliance on others. Even someone who has an antisocial or narcissistic personality disorder who seems to be very, very secure and self-assured, it's fake. It's part of their personality disorder. This self-centeredness is often mistaken for a high level of self-confidence. They're not confident. All these 10 personality disorder types are not confident. That's the last that they are. They're not confident at all. And they're constantly looking for others to assert them indirectly, vicariously. They need others to assure them that they exist and that they have any value. And because their need is so strong for others to be their audience, they tend to be very manipulative. Even the codependent personality disorder type, which is often the victim, is usually very manipulative because he or she has the same problem than any other personality disorder types. They need all the time, they need someone to tell them, yes, you exist, or yes, you did well, or yes, I need you. They need to feel needed. That's one of the reasons why they usually do too much for others, because they want this gratification. Unfortunately, someone who has a dependent or codependent personality disorder often seeks out narcissists and borderliners as partners, and then they have very unhealthy, dysfunctional, but also very effective relationship of gratifying each other and giving each other what they need, their unhealthy supply. A dependent personality disorder type knows, more or less consciously, that their worth, their value is conditional. And also their being loved is conditional. They have accepted this as small children already, so it's fine for them to have a partner for whom giving and receiving love is also conditional and not unconditional. Love, of course, should be unconditional, otherwise it's questionable if it's love at all. But if you're used to conditional love from your earliest childhood on, then you may not know that there's such a thing as unconditional love. And people will always choose conditional love above no love at all. Another thing that all these personality types have in common is that they crave intimacy and fear intimacy at the same time, or alternatingly, or at least it looks alternatingly, that it's a push-pull relationship very often, or like it is said, it's a combination of love bombing and then distancing or shaming. Anyway, if we come back to the Hawkins scale again, shame and guilt are the two, let's say, lowest states of consciousness on the scale, and shame and guilt are very, very important for personality disorders. As children, they have been shamed and made to feel guilty very early on. It has not been allowed by the parents or whatever agency of raising there was for them to develop a normal personality. So they had to develop another kind of personality. So they do have a personality, but it works a little bit differently. It's still very similar to a normal personality and has all the pros and cons of a personality, but it's very fragile and it's based on fear and shame and guilt and self-loathing. And deep down, half consciously, they know it's fake. They know the personality is fake, but they keep it because they're afraid that if this disordered personality is exposed and disappears, then there's nothing. Which is of course the case. That's why so many people keep their personalities, no matter if you have a disorder or not. Once the personality is recognized as not being real, which is called awakening, then the fear sets in. Oh my God, then who am I? Am I not anything then at all? The problem is this identification with the personality, not the personality. People are identified with their personality and assume that is all they are. If this personality goes away, then they die, which is not true. And this fear is much, much stronger if you have a personality disorder, because you have created this fake personality, this disordered personality, instead of a normal personality. And deep down you know that you have created it, that it is not a real thing. But you hold on to it nonetheless, because a raft may be worse than a ship, but a raft is better than nothing if you're swimming in the open water. So unfortunately, on the spiritual path, there are also quite a few people who have personality disorders. It's not that people with personality disorders don't look for spiritual enlightenment. And also, it's not that people who are looking for spiritual enlightenment don't have personality disorders. Quite the contrary, there's one personality disorder which is very, very common, super extremely common, which is dependent personality disorder, of course, which is also very common in the whole wide world outside of spirituality, but it's super common in spirituality, which is the main reason why people are always looking for a guru. Have you always wondered why people look for gurus and saints to follow and ask them all kinds of questions? My God, should I marry this woman or that woman? How many children should I have? Should I practice this profession or that job? All kinds of questions they ask because they're too insecure to make any decisions for themselves. And often people who ask these very, very personal questions that no guru can possibly know a better answer about than you yourself, they often suffer from dependent personality disorder. And of course they're looking then for a guru who might be a guru with narcissistic personality disorder. Most gurus are also below Hawkins scale 700. It's very rare that anyone is achieving or reaching 700 plus on the Hawkins scale, which is third tier spiral dynamics, or location 12 plus. Most popular gurus are between Hawkins scale 500 and 600. Very few are between 600 and 650. And there are also quite a few below 500, between 300 and 500. So those gurus still have a very strong attachment to their personality. Even if they know that it's fake, they're not disidentified with it already. And if that guru had a personality disorder before awakening, then he or she will very likely still have it after awakening. You can be awake and still have a personality disorder. With enlightenment, it's a bit more difficult. Then it usually goes away or diminishes to a degree that is not disturbing anymore. Because with enlightenment, you don't need your personality anymore. Then also you don't need the personality disorder anymore. But until enlightenment, you still have the feeling that you need your personality and thus you still need your disorder, because so far it seems to have worked out very well, which is not true, of course, but it seems to be that way. It has protected you in a way, in a very dysfunctional way. It has protected you and you're afraid to give up that protection. So the codependent or dependent personality disorder is always looking for security, for gratification, for someone who tells them how well they did something. But there's very, very low self-esteem, and there's the tendency to do more than your share in any kind of relationship activity, because you fear criticism or abandonment and so on. And you prefer to be overwhelmed and even burnt out to risking to be ostracized or not needed, basically. That's the worst thing, that someone tells you, I don't need you, which is of course actually a healthy thing. But for someone with a dependent personality disorder or most other personality disorders, it's the most horrible thing you can tell them. All personality disorders, but especially dependent personality disorder types, have boundary issues. They cannot feel their own boundaries and they cannot feel other people's boundaries. So there's a constant overstepping of boundaries or letting others breach your boundary. It's the helper syndrome. Yeah? And there's also a controlling, manipulative element, as I said. There's always a smile and a tendency to apologize for everything, and a tendency to try to make others happy all the time. And of course, there is the need to have some strong influences in your life, some strong partner in business or love or spirituality in the form of a guru that tells you what to do because you're too insecure to decide that yourself. So that's number one, dependent personality disorder. Number two, antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder, if it's on a very low scale, is actually not too bad. I took over this idea of one psychologist who uses a scale from 0 to 5. 0 is no personality disorder. 1 and 2 is pretty low. It's still, you can still function okay. 3 is medium. It's already noticeable. And 4 and 5 is full blast. So many people on the spiritual path have an antisocial personality disorder of 1. Out of 0 to 5, 1. Very slight, but that enables you actually to think outside of the box and to look for other personalities, other possibilities in life. You don't feel the need to follow the common rules so much. As you have seen in the last 3 years, people get very panicky if they see that others don't follow the herd. And if you have a slight antisocial personality disorder, then you don't care if you or anyone else is following the rules or not. Which can be a disadvantage, of course, naturally, but it can be, if it's only scale 1 out of 0 to 5, it can be sometimes an advantage even. There's no official idea of how many people, percentage-wise, suffer from antisocial personality disorder, because the probability that such a person will go to therapy and have him or herself diagnosed that way officially is less than 1%. They usually wouldn't do that. So we have no idea. But according to my experience, it's quite common. Especially in spirituality, because that is a very, very alternative way of living and regarding the world. And unfortunately, there are lots of gurus who have antisocial personality disorder on a scale from 1 or 2 often. So that can lead to weird stuff where you wonder, how is that possible? How can a spiritual guru do such a thing? Like sexual favors and stuff, yeah? That is the reason. Then number 3, narcissistic personality disorder, the most famous of all. It seems the narcissist, that's the same. Narcissistic personality disorder and narcissism is the same. The narcissist seems very, very secure, but the opposite is the case. The narcissist needs an audience, otherwise he's lost. Or she. You can forget about gender differences here. All the personality disorders can be male and female. There seems to be a slight tendency that borderline personality is more in women. But that may be outdated information, because it can just as well be that male borderline personality disorder types can be recognized less well, which is my theory, or not only my theory, but my experience, let's say, that it's very hard sometimes to see if a male person has a borderline personality disorder. It manifests a bit differently than female borderline personality disorder. There are a lot of commonalities between antisocial, narcissist and borderline. They can be easily mixed up, and they often do exist simultaneously. You can have an antisocial personality disorder and a narcissistic personality disorder and a borderline disorder. One of them will dominate usually, but you can have all of them, unfortunately. you can have lice and fleas. So narcissists and antisocial personality disorders are usually very dominating, but narcissists have this huge charisma. Also, borderliners can have a huge charisma, and male borderliners can also be very dominating. Female borderliners, it varies. It depends in which state they are. A borderline is a very strange word, and many psychiatrists don't like it because it's a huge syndrome of dozens of symptoms, and it's a little bit different with everyone, and there's no clear picture. But in the borderline personality, there's a tendency to hurt yourself or to put yourself into situations where you get hurt or even degraded. If a borderliner doesn't have a partner, some kind of partner, via whom he or she can vicariously have a sense of existence, he or she will feel that she doesn't exist, and this will put her in a horrible state of mind. So she always tries to have someone around to assert that she does exist and is needed and is beautiful and so on. It's a very drama-ish personality type who can switch emotions very quickly. It's called borderline because it's an old name, because it seems to be on the brink to psychosis. There used to be an old distinction in psychology between neurosis and psychosis. Neurosis is if you still know that you're crazy, and psychosis if you don't know anymore that you're crazy. You're so crazy that you don't know anymore that you're crazy. And because people with borderline personality disorder are usually exactly on the border between neurosis and psychosis, that is where the name comes from. So they can quickly go into states where you wonder if that is the person that you've just talked to 5 minutes before, or that if you actually know this person at all. And then the fifth personality disorder I want to talk about today is the histrionic personality disorder. Again, it's a very outdated name. I wonder why they still kept the name histrionic. It comes from the uterus. So it used to be to describe female drama queens, and of course the male doctors 100 years ago or so, they thought it must have something to do with the uterus and the female hormones, so they called it histrionic personality disorder. But it's actually not a hormonal thing and has nothing to do with the uterus. And who knows why they kept this outdated name. There can be men and women who have this personality disorder. Again, it looks like borderline. It looks as if there are more women who have this, but it's not the case. So the histrionic personality disorder has this very, very, very strong emotions. Extremely strong. The others can have that too, narcissist and borderline. But histrionic is the drama queen. If she or he feels emotions, they're much stronger than in the average human being. And they're swept away by it or by them. So there are huge mood swings. In seconds, they can switch back and forth and to and fro. If you ever lived in any kind of spiritual community, big or small, and for a long time or a short time, you will know that these kind of drama queens, be it borderline or histrionic, are quite common also. You will always find at least one of them in every spiritual community of at least 20 to 30 people. They're quite common, especially borderline is relatively common. It may be of the four, antisocial, narcissist, borderline, and histrionic, borderline may be the most common. And there's one more thing about borderliners. They usually have a weird relationship to sexuality because it's the most intense form of intimacy, and they do have intimacy issues, all of them. But borderline may be a bit stronger than others, and so there tends to be a very intense and sometimes also kinky sex. And again, if that happens in kind of in an ashram or a spiritual community or even in a guru, then sexuality will play a part. I remember a guru of the Gurdjieff line, self-proclaimed modern Gurdjieff guru, who was homosexual and who was very famous of having lots of homosexual relationships with his students or pupils or followers, even male. He was male and his bed companions were male, and he even chose some who were not homosexual, and he promised them that it would be a really good thing to have sex with him because he was such an enlightened fellow. And this is typically borderline for me, I'd say. There are two more personality disorders which I may talk about in another video, the Avoidant and the Schizoid personality disorder, which are also quite common in spiritual communities. The Schizoid one is, as I said, someone who cannot feel his or her emotions very well because they are split off. At some point, this person decided it's better for survival not to feel your own emotions. And then, of course, if they then hear in spirituality that you shouldn't listen to your emotions, they think, oh, great, that's anyway what I'm doing. And avoidant personality disorder is, of course, also very common because then they can avoid to make decisions. They just run with a group, and by themselves they wouldn't be very able to achieve anything. Also in ashrams and monasteries, avoidant personality disorder types can thrive because they are so very, very, very shy and so very, very afraid of criticism. But if you live in this closed system of a monastery or ashram and follow the rules, then things are easier. So as a summary, there are 5 personality disorder types, or maybe 7 that out of 10 that are quite common also in spiritual circles: dependent, antisocial, narcissist, borderline, histrionic, avoidant, and schizoid. And you might have one or several of them in a very low grade of maybe 1. But you also might have one of them on a higher grade, 3, 4, or 5, especially the dependent personality disorder. And in spiritual communities, I've seen that about 40 to 50% of the inhabitants usually suffer from dependent personality disorder, while gurus below Hawkins scale 700 often suffer from narcissistic or borderline personality disorder. Not like 50%, but or antisocial also. I'd say about 10%, which is already a lot, which is already too much actually. Consider that 1 out of 10 famous gurus has a personality disorder, which means that they have huge problems of dealing with other people. That's the main thing about personality disorders, that you have a huge problem of relating to other people, to yourself and to other people. So you will miscommunicate, manipulate, misrepresent things all the time in any kind of interaction. So what can we learn from this? Several things. One thing I can suggest is that you may be a little bit more suspicious about the mental health of your guru. And the second thing is you can be a bit more suspicious about your own feelings of needing one. Thirdly, although personality disorders are considered to be very difficult to treat, I don't necessarily think so, especially for spiritually interested people, because their aim is anyway to get rid of their personality, and then also the personality disorder will be gotten rid of simultaneously. Yet only on a quite high level of spirituality, which we call enlightenment or full enlightenment. Okay, this video is already much too long, but I hope interesting for you. Give it a like. If you liked it, it helps others to find the channel. Thank you to all my patrons. Thank you for joining me as a Patreon, and see you soon.